My name's Ocean Robbins, and it is a joy and privilege and pleasure to share some time with all of you now. I'm sorry I can't be with you personally, especially because I've had the pleasure of coming to Singapore before, about 20 years ago, and I was so taken by the beauty of the culture, the open hearts, the warm people, the fabulous food, the wonderful climate. You all live in a beautiful place, and the clean streets. And I'm just so inspired by Singapore and living as I do in the United States, which is a very big country with some very big problems. I'm really grateful for the opportunity now to be able to share some words and hopefully some wisdom with all of you today. And I want to begin by honoring the incredible work of Kampung Senang and the work that's being done over there around cancer and health and promotion of healthy living. It's incredibly inspiring, I think, to the whole world what this organization is accomplishing, and you all have the opportunity now to learn more about it, and I'm so grateful for that. The Kampung Senang Charity and Education Foundation has helped more than 1,600 cancer victims between the ages of 2 and 102 through its holistic support program. And what we've been seeing is that the number of cancer victims is continuing to grow around the world, and that whereas it used to be that most victims were in their 60s, now more and more victims are in their 40s. And there are even many cancer victims in their 20s and their 30s. And this is alarming. We're also seeing rates of obesity that are growing rapidly. In Singapore, in the last decade, obesity rates have doubled. This is very similar to the situation in my country, in the United States, where obesity is skyrocketing. We're also seeing rates of diabetes in children that are growing rapidly. In the United States, it is estimated that 1 in 3 kids is expected to get diabetes in their lifetimes. We're seeing more and more people that are living chronically ill. You see, in developing countries, in countries where there isn't a lot of money, the leading causes of death are infectious disease, and sometimes people are actually dying of starvation. But in more wealthy countries, where people have enough, we tend to consume too much, and we tend to consume too much of the most fatty and rich kinds of foods, and we end up digging our own graves with our knives and forks. So in the United States today, we now have a system where we're spending 18% of our gross domestic product on medical care. Now, people call it health care, but I don't call it health care because it's not about helping people be healthy. It's about treating the symptoms of a lifetime of poor habits that are causing disease and illness. In the United States today, 3/4 of our medical spending is going to treat chronic illness. So that's the kind of stuff. It's not like you fall and break a bone, or you get sick with some infection and then you need some drugs to help you recover. This is the kind of thing that you live with day in and day out, year in and year out, often for the rest of your life. So more and more people are living sick. 3/4 of our medical spending is for chronic disease. Scientists and doctors estimate that 2/3 of that spending could be eliminated with a change in diet. 2/3. So we're spending so much money on this, treating the symptoms of disease, and we're getting more and more people that are living sick all the time. That's why we need a food revolution. We need a food revolution because we believe in our work, my dad and I, that the food we eat has enormous power. It has a power to vote for the future we want. And we can either take a stand with our food choices, with our own knives and forks, for a future where we're going to be more sick, we're going to be more lifeless, we're not going to have vitality and energy, or we can take a stand for a future where we're going to have lots of energy and we're going to be vibrant and strong and healthy and have strong immune systems. Now, there's no diet that's ever going to make anybody live forever, as far as I know. And there's no diet that's probably ever going to make anybody be guaranteed to never have any pain or suffering in life. But we can do the best we can with what we've got to maximize our chances for a long, healthy, thriving life. And I'm very grateful that I got to grow up in a family where we were looking at how we could maximize our chances for thriving from the very beginning of my life. And actually, it's even started before I was born. I get the opportunity to work with my dad, John Robbins, who's a best-selling author and now my colleague, in directing the Food Revolution Network. Now, my dad actually was born into an unusual family, and I'm sure you'll hear him tell you this story as well. And I grew up monetarily poor. We didn't have a lot of money or a lot of stuff, but I felt rich because I had time with my mom and dad. I had beautiful nature all around me. I had a lot of love in my life. I didn't eat ice cream, but I didn't feel deprived. Then when we moved to California when I was 10, my dad began working on a book called Diet for a New America, which came out in 1987. And Diet for New America is about how our food choices affect our health, our happiness, and the future of life on Earth. It became this runaway bestseller, and millions of people were reading it and inspired by it, and the media started calling my dad the rebel without a cone. Here he was, he'd walked away from this ice cream fortune, and now he was advocating for health and sustainability. So my dad became this media sensation, and he inspired a lot of people to look at their food choices as an opportunity to take responsibility for their lives. Our family received tens of thousands of letters from enthusiastic readers thanking my dad for changing their lives. And then when I was 16, I decided I wanted to reach out to my generation, so I founded a nonprofit organization called the Youth for Environmental Sanity, or YES. And we organized this national tour. We spoke to school assemblies about the environment and what youth could do to make a difference in the world. And we focused a lot on the power of our food choices. We reached more than 650,000 students in schools all across the United States and all around the world. And then we started organizing week-long summer camps for young leaders who wanted to make a difference in the world, including one that we held in Singapore. We worked with young leaders all over the planet, and in time organized gatherings for leaders from over 65 countries. Eventually, I realized that I really wanted to join forces directly with my dad. So a couple years ago, we launched together the Food Revolution Network. And what we've done is we've organized these online gatherings where people can participate for free from anywhere in the world in these virtual summits called Food Revolution Summits. And we interview some of the top leaders in movements for healthy, sustainable, humane, and conscious food for everybody. And we broadcast these interviews all over the world. So these interviews have been getting a tremendous response. We had over 72,000 people sign up for our last summit. And we're getting to engage with some of the real top leaders in the food movement. People like Drs. Mark Hyman, Caldwell Esselstyn, Dean Ornish, T. Colin Campbell, or culture changers, people like Russell Simmons, who helped to found hip-hop, or Cory Booker, who's a big prominent mayor in the United States of the city of Newark, New Jersey. We've been interviewing these folks and asking them what do they see happening in the world of food, and more importantly, what can we do about it? And I'll tell you, the results are amazing. What we're seeing is that as a result of an enormous number of studies that have been done over the recent number of decades, we now know conclusively how to prevent much of the suffering and illness that is taking place in the world today. We know with our plates and with our knives and forks how we can absolutely make a dent in climate change, how we can absolutely create a world where there's enough food that more and more people can eat, and we can take a major bite out of the poverty that is causing many people to starve on this planet. We can make massive changes just through a change in diet. So what are we finding out? Well, here's the deal. I'll give you a few specific stories here. Dr. Mark Hyman worked with a church in Orange County called Saddleback Church. They have 30,000 members, and this church community was pretty overweight, like most people in the United States often tend to be. And so the pastor, Rick Warren, said, well, I want our congregation to be healthy. So he hired Dr. Mark Hyman to provide some training and develop some programs for the church. And using a combination of a plant-strong diet based around real natural foods and building networks of community so that people in the church could have a support mechanism to help them apply what they were learning day in and day out. The congregation of Saddleback Church in 1 year lost 250,000 pounds. 250,000 pounds, that's right. So based on that data then, they looked at what else was happening, and they realized their church had seen massive drops in need for diabetes medications, high blood pressure medications. 53% of their church congregation reported having more energy, better sleep, more happiness. And so Dr. Mark Hyman said, hey, if we can do it in Saddleback Church, we can probably do it a lot of other places. Well, so now the model from Saddleback Church is being shared in other places. And that's why I want you to know about it, because you can take advantage of these principles too. A healthy, plant-strong diet based around real, natural foods. And getting community, like you all are doing by being at this conference right now. Getting community, learning from others, building support networks so that you can really sustain and thrive in a new way of living. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, working at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio in the United States, started working with patients who had severe heart disease. These were patients that were, in many cases, not expected to live more than a year. Most of them had failed 1 or 2 or more bypass operations or surgeries, and they were not doing well. Dr. Esselstyn put these patients on a plant-strong, nearly vegan diet. That is to say, they were not eating hardly any animal products, or no animal products. They were eating a very low-fat diet. They were eating lots of fiber, lots of fruits and vegetables, and beans and some grains. He put them on this diet, and his patients saw some incredible results. People who had been told they probably didn't have a year to live, decades later, are still living and thriving. In fact, 99% of the patients in his program who have been compliant, decades later, have seen a complete reversal in their heart disease symptoms. This is amazing. This means, says Dr. Esselstyn, that we can not only prevent heart disease, we can cure it. Apparently 99% of the time. President Bill Clinton, who was president of the United States from 1990 to 1998, some years after his presidency came to completion, he was suffering from some pretty severe health problems himself. He'd always loved his hamburgers and fast food and high-fat diet, and now it was catching up with him. The president had to have a quintuple bypass operation in order to keep the blood flowing to his heart. Well, after his operation, his doctor said he probably was going to get more heart disease problems and symptoms, and he probably didn't have too long to live. But the president heeded the advice of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Dean Ornish, and some of the other leaders in this field. He read their books and he took their advice, changed his diet, again went on a plant-strong, nearly vegan diet, and watched his heart disease symptoms reverse. He's lost 25 pounds. He has way more energy than ever. He feels like he has a new lease on life. So the President Clinton has become a major spokesperson now for a change in diet and for what the value of that can be for all of us. There are so many stories of people who are finding out the truth about our food and finding out about the power of our plates to make a major difference in our lives. Dr. T. Colin Campbell conducted what's been described as the largest study on diet and disease in world history. In China, it's called the China Study. Over the course of 20 years, tens of thousands of people were studied in all different communities across China to look at the impact of their changing diets as they were becoming more westernized and more modernized, as they were eating more and more, I'm sorry to say, like we do in the United States. They were able to track the health outcomes, and they were able to distinguish genetic factors from lifestyle and diet factors. So they watched what happened, and what they saw over and over again was what we see all over the world, which is that as communities become wealthier, they often tend to consume more rich foods. That is to say, more high-fat foods, more animal products. It takes a lot more natural resources to produce a meat-centered diet than a vegetarian diet. So people who are wealthy tend to be able to afford the fruits of that wealth. But unfortunately, we're getting diseases that used to only happen to kings and queens. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, strokes, obesity. These are the diseases that are killing more and more people in the modern world. Now, it's great when you can have good sanitation, when you can have clean food that you can trust, then you're going to prevent all kinds of diseases that are coming from infections. But if we replace that with the diseases of affluence, like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity, then we're still going to be dying far sooner than we need to. If you want the optimal opportunity for thriving health, Dr. Colin Campbell, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Mark Hyman, and many other leading medical authorities of our day are discovering, what you need to do is to have clean, healthy food, a clean, healthy environment, and eat lots and lots of plants. Base your diet around plants, and base your diet around real, whole, organic, natural foods. In the modern world today, we have a lot of diets that are based around processed foods that come out of packages. More and more of us are eating things that have been stripped of their minerals and nutrients. We eat white flour instead of whole grain flour. We eat white rice instead of whole grain rice. And what's happened when you're eating white rice or white flour is that you're eating the grain it's had the bran and the germ taken away. And the bran and the germ are where most of the fiber and vitamins and minerals are located. So when you take those things away, you wind up with something that's a lot less nutritious than what you started with. Same thing with white sugar. When we eat white sugar, we're eating a chemically produced product that has lost a lot of the nutrients of the original sugar cane. So we need to eat less donuts and less junk food and less candy bars. We need to eat more natural foods, more wholesome foods, more foods that come from the ground and less foods that come out of a package. And as we make those kinds of changes, we discover extraordinary results. Now, another disease of the modern world that is growing very, very rapidly is Alzheimer's disease. My own grandmother died of it a few years ago. At the end of her life, she couldn't even recognize her own loved ones. She needed constant care 24 hours a day, and she was miserable. It was so painful to see my own grandmother fade away like that. Well, Alzheimer's disease is growing very, very rapidly. And in fact, in the United States today, by the time they reach 85 years old, for those of us who are lucky enough to do so, more than half of us have Alzheimer's disease. It's not a pretty picture. And the costs of treating Alzheimer's disease are expected to triple in the next generation in the United States. Well, it turns out that we're not just victims of this. We can actually make a difference. The Chicago Health and Aging Project conducted a study of thousands of people in Chicago of all different economic backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. And they were looking at Alzheimer's and they were looking at diet. And here's what they discovered. They found that people who ate 25 grams of saturated fat per day had more than 3.5 times the rates of Alzheimer's disease compared to people who ate 13 grams of saturated fat per day. They also found that people who consumed large amounts of vitamin E, which you can get from things like walnuts, sunflower seeds, and broccoli, they were getting Alzheimer's rates reduced by 70%. So whereas people who had low vitamin E consumption levels were getting Alzheimer's 14% of the time within the period of the study, people who had high vitamin E consumption levels were getting it 6% of the time within the period of the study. So what they basically concluded was that you can extend your healthy brain life by about 19 years simply by eating a low saturated fat, low trans fat, and high vitamin E diet. Again, it's the same basic principles. Less meat, less animal products, less highly processed foods, more natural foods, and more plants. It's pretty simple, but the results are profound. We also have a context with genetically engineered foods, and I want to talk about that for a little bit because genetically engineered foods are spreading all over the world, and they're primarily being driven by companies in my country, in the United States. Most of all, one particular company called Monsanto Corporation. Now, Monsanto came up with this idea of genetically engineering foods some years back. About 25 years ago, they started bringing them forward into the marketplace. And their concept was, and that what they promised the world was, that science could engineer foods that would have some really valuable properties. They said that they could produce foods that would produce higher yields, that would use less water and be more drought resistant, that would have higher nutritional value, and that would require less use of pesticides. That all sounds great, and if that's what was happening, I'd be celebrating. But unfortunately, it's not what's happening. When you actually look at what's been brought to market, what's actually being grown now, genetically engineered crops do not have any of those traits. On the whole, genetically engineered crops are not producing higher yields, they're not requiring less water, they're not needing less pesticides, and they're not offering higher nutritional value. What they are doing is one of two things. They're producing Bt, a toxin in every cell of many plants, and they're resistant to Roundup, which is an herbicide that can be sprayed on the fields. So now farmers don't have to spray pesticides on their fields anymore because the Bt-imbued crops are actually living pesticide factories. The Environmental Protection Agency in the United States registers Bt crops as pesticides. Then we've got Roundup, which is being poured on the fields in massive quantities today. And as it turns out, the crops are indeed resistant to it for a while. But then eventually what's happening is that weeds that were being killed by this herbicide are now developing resistance. So now there's starting to be some weeds that are not killed by Roundup, and genetic engineering companies are starting to have to come up with new ideas for new ways of developing crops that are resistant to other herbicides. Dow Chemical Company has developed corn that is resistant to the herbicide 2,4-D. Now 2,4-D is one of the 2 active ingredients in a product known as Agent Orange, which the United States poured all over Vietnam during the Vietnam War. It's been directly linked to cancer, birth defects, and all sorts of reproductive problems. It's killed large numbers of people. It's a chemical warfare agent. Now, Dow Chemical wants to pour it directly on the fields growing food for humans to wipe out the weeds while their corn stands up tall. I don't know about you, but I would rather not be pouring chemical warfare agents on our fields. I would rather not be eating pesticides. I'd rather have pesticides that I can wash off, or ideally have my food grown organically with farmers that are using natural methods to control pests. It can be done. You can actually get higher yields with the organic and natural methods. So when we look at our food choices, we realize that we really have a stark choice today. Do we want to go down this industrial mass production model, which is making more and more people sick, which is costing us a lot of money in healthcare costs, which is depleting our environment, which is ultimately creating toxins in our food system that are coming back into our own bodies? Or do we want to choose a more natural, more healthy way of living, which science is telling us can help us be healthy and help us thrive? The opportunity before us today is quite exciting, I think. Because when we choose to be a part of the food revolution, we realize that we are a part of something that is growing powerfully and rapidly, that is changing the course of history. I don't know the data for Singapore, but I can tell you that in the United States, in the last 10 years, consumption of organic foods has increased tenfold in the last 10 years. Also in the United States, in the last 10 years, farmers' markets have increased fourfold. Now, farmers' markets are where people can buy directly from farmers instead of having to buy in big supermarkets. And it used to be that pretty much all of our food was sold through supermarkets. But nowadays, more and more people are buying direct from farmers. And we're seeing this massive interest in where people's food comes from. People are buying more local food. They're buying more natural food. They like to know the people who grew it for them. And I think this is exciting because it means we're getting more connected to the earth. And honestly, the farmers are making more money. I think farmers deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. It is hard work growing food. And I want to see our farmers treated well and honored and celebrated by the community. And farmers markets give us an opportunity to interact with farmers directly and ask them questions about how their crops are doing and how they're weathering the drought, and to feel more connected to things. So I think it's very exciting, the growth of farmers markets and local foods and organic foods. In the United States, we've also seen a drop in beef consumption of 26% in the last 26 years. That happens to be the same number of years since my dad wrote his best-selling book, Diet for New America. So I'm glad to think that my family may have played some part in this drop. And around the world, more and more people are realizing that they don't want to follow the United States' very dangerous example when it comes to food choices. More and more people are taking an interest in how we can reduce our consumption of sugar and packaging. Now, that isn't to say we don't have a long ways to go. In the US, in the year 1700, the average American ate 7 pounds of sugar per year. Today, the average American eats 150 pounds of sugar per year. So we've got a long way to go. And again, I don't know the statistics in Singapore, but I would bet that there's more and more sugar and packaged foods and meat consumption happening in Singapore like there is in so many countries that it can afford it around the world. And there's probably more and more cancer hitting younger and younger people as well. The reality is, though, that you don't have to be a victim of this. You can change it. You can change it for yourself. You can change it for your family. You can change it for your nation. You can help to change it for your world. Food's very social. Throughout history, the act of breaking bread together or sitting down to share a meal together has been a form of connection and communion between peoples and cultures and communities. So the challenge then is that when you want to eat differently than what's normal around you, it can be hard. It can be like swimming upstream almost to try to change the food culture. You know, the reality is that it's often a lot easier to buy meat or to buy junk food than it is to buy healthy real food. And in Singapore, you have a lot of options because you have so many different cuisines and cultures available and so much fresh food growing in the region. But still, it can be hard to do something different than the norm. And yet when you make those changes, when you say, I'm going to eat healthy food because I want to take care of my body and I want to take care of my world, then the beauty is that you do so not just for yourself, but for everybody around you, for all the people that you love. Because when you eat healthy food, it impacts the world around you. It impacts your community and your family. Because when you share a meal with people, then of course they're going to eat it too, right? So we teach by example. Mahatma Gandhi said, "My life is my message." I think it's true. We need to make our lives into our messages. And when we do, when we take a stand for the world we want, when we take a stand for the food choices that will really help us thrive, that is a powerful action. It's a powerful statement. We're saying, I want a world where I can be healthy. I want a world where healthy food is more available to more people. I want a world where my nation and my community and my company are standing for a better future for all life. And step by step, we can help make that happen. And that's the joy of the food revolution. George Bernard Shaw once said, he said, "This is the true joy in life, to be used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. To be a force of nature, instead of a feverish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." He said, "I'm a member of the community, and as a member, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can before I die. Life is no brief candle to me. It's more of a splendid torch, which I want to burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." So I want to thank you for burning your candle and burning your torch and taking a stand and making a difference with your life, because you really can change the course of history. One of the other realities of our food choices is that, of course, they don't just affect us, they affect our climate, and they affect other creatures with whom we share this earth. When my dad was writing Diet for a New America, he was working on the first chapter in 1985. The book came out in 1987, and the first chapter is about animals, and it talks a lot about how animals often have more intelligence and more feelings than a lot of us can realize. And while he was working on that book, he was locked up in his room for about 16 hours a day, typing away on his old typewriter. And my mom and I were out cooking and cleaning together one day, and we had this terrible fruit fly problem. There were fruit flies all over the house, and they'd been there for many days. And my mom finally said, "I can't take it anymore. I'm going to get a fly swatter." And I said, "Mom, what do you think you're doing? We don't want to kill the flies." She was like, "What do you mean? We can't move out and let the flies take over." Now, this was serious stuff in our family because we cared about all life and we didn't want to hurt anybody. But my mom had had enough, so she went out and bought a fly swatter. I stopped her at the door and I said, "I don't want you bringing that thing in this house." She said, "You think we should move out and let the flies take over?" I said, "I think we should consider it." And then I said, "Okay, seriously, give me 24 hours to use nonviolent means." So I wrote a letter. I said, "Dear fruit flies, we wish you the juiciest cow dung piles and the biggest compost heaps for you and for all generations to come. And we have to tell you that we buy the food here and you don't. We pay the rent here and you don't. There's a lot of food that our limited stomachs can't eat and yours can. That's why we have a compost pile. Please eat outside and eat the compost. And please leave our home alone for us." And I said, "We have to warn you that we have purchased a fly swatter, and we intend to use it if you aren't gone by dawn tomorrow." And I pasted this note up next to a window, and I drew an arrow pointing to the window, and I left the window open a couple inches. And I then read the note aloud and told the fruit flies they needed to go out that window by dawn tomorrow, or else we would have to take action with the fly swatter. Well, this was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. that evening we went out. When I woke up in the morning, there was not a fly in the house. Left the note up for 2 weeks, no flies. Took it down, the next day there were flies coming back. Put the note back up, they were gone again the day after that. So what do we make of this story? Do you think it's possible that a 10-year-old boy communicated with fruit flies? If it's possible for a 10-year-old boy to communicate with fruit flies, do you think it might also be possible that other animals might have more intelligence or wisdom than we sometimes give them credit for? Now, I don't know what really happened in that story, but I know that I had the experience of treating fruit flies with respect and giving them the opportunity to treat us with respect. And what happened was that I had an experience of connection. I have had the experience with cats, with dogs, with pigs, with cows, looking in their eyes and realizing there's another being here. There's another creature here that has feelings, that wants to avoid pain, that wants to love its babies, that wants to live a happy life. And yet the way we're treating animals today in food production is as if they were commodities, as if they were machines that we could exploit and control and dominate, and subject them to any amount of cruelty as long as it reduces the price per pound. They're treated like machines in modern factory farms, instead of like real living creatures. Now in the United States, I know that most people don't think that's right. 93% of the American public believes that animals that are raised for food should be treated with respect and should be treated without cruelty. And yet, the reality is that they're being treated with immense cruelty. We have chickens that are in cages so small they can't even lift a single wing. We have baby cows that are taken from their mothers within hours of birth. They're never allowed to nurse. And they're chained at the neck and sold into veal operations where they're never allowed to take a single step so that their flesh will remain soft. We have pigs that are put in these gestational crates, mother pigs, so that they're never allowed to nurse their babies, except through these steel slats. They can never take a single step throughout their pregnancy. They're forced to lay in this very unnatural position when their pigs can nurse through the steel slats, but they can never actually even lick their little ones. This is very cruel, I think, and I think it's unnecessary. What we're finding is that when we raise animals very unnaturally, they get very sick. And then, in order to keep them alive, we have to give them a lot of antibiotics. Well, those antibiotics that we're feeding to animals in factory farms today are breeding antibiotic-resistant bacteria. This is the bacteria that are not killed by the antibiotics. In the United States, we feed 80% of our antibiotics to livestock and not to people. So we're breeding antibiotic-resistant bacteria in our factory farms because we're treating these animals so unnaturally. And what that's leading to is bacteria that now is not being killed off when people get sick of infectious disease. And we give them antibiotics, they don't work. 10,000 people in the United States last year died of diseases caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Diseases that only a few years ago would have been cured just by taking a few pills. Around the world, this bacteria is spreading, and our factory farms are driving the spread of it. So our most potent weapons against infectious disease, antibiotics, are now increasingly being rendered impotent. Some people could say that our factory farms have in a way become biological weapons factories. We're breeding bacteria that kills people. We need to make a change. So when you take a stand for healthy food, when you take a stand for natural food, when you take a stand for a plant-strong diet, you're reducing the demand for factory farms. You're reducing the demand for these systems that are treating animals so cruelly and that are breeding antibiotic-resistant bacteria that is killing so many people. You see, it's all connected. Everything we do sends out ripples all over the planet. And the food that you eat is an opportunity to take care of your health, to say, I love my body, I love my world, I want to be healthy, I want a healthy world. And when you do that, you're part of a global movement that is growing rapidly of people who are getting informed, getting mobilized, getting engaged, and making a difference. Healthy food is a right. Everybody can participate in the food revolution. So I want to thank you I want to thank you for your time and your attention today. I want to thank you for caring about the health of your community and of Singapore and of your family. I want to thank you for being part of the food revolution in all the ways that you are. And every time you take a step, every time you serve healthy food for a loved one, every time you choose to avoid something junky and unnatural and unhealthy and choose healthy, natural food, every time you choose to eat spinach instead of a candy bar, every time you choose to eat fresh fruits and vegetables instead of processed factory farmed animal products, you are taking a stand. You're making a difference. You're part of the solution. There's an incredible correlation between rates of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and heart disease and many of the other diseases that are plaguing the modern world and the food that we eat. And the wonderful thing is, you get to learn from all that. You get to learn from what the experts have found out. And you get to be a part of the solution. So please join us. Join us in this work, join us in this movement, and join us online at foodrevolution.org. You can sign up again at foodrevolution.org to get the latest tips and insights and information, to learn about our work and how you can be involved in the food revolution. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and for your action. Blessings on your family, on your lives, on your city, on your country, on your community. And blessings on your health.